First things first, I think it's important to define terms, because otherwise my point might get totally lost on someone who has a different understanding of what conservative means. Conservatism is an ideology that holds to traditional views, both social and economic. It is defined by Merriam-Webster as a disposition in politics to preserve what is established. Obviously, not all traditional values are harmful. Traditional, like the word natural, is neither good or bad. That's why it's a logical fallacy to appeal to tradition or to nature. Someone who holds one or two conservative views isn't really a conservative. And many people who are relatively apolitical will identify as a conservative without really understanding what it means. In this video, I will be discussing conservative values that are politically relevant. Surely what it means to be a conservative may change over time, but in our current cultural context, it means someone who believes in the privatization of social services and holds traditional values like the nuclear family, gender roles, and patriotism, for example. I recognize that not everyone who identifies as conservative holds all of these views. Many people identify as fiscally conservative and socially liberal. That's why I think it's so important to separate people from their ideologies. I want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not against conservatives making the case for animal rights, because ultimately it's better to be inconsistently kind than consistently unkind. I think you can find consistencies within an overall inconsistent framework. For example, it makes a lot more sense to support progressive candidates as a Christian, given what Jesus said about immigrants, prostitutes, and the poor. But Christianity is an inconsistent framework. Certain progressive policies may be consistent within Christianity, but Christianity is not consistent with progressive ideology. In the same way, veganism may be consistent with certain conservative values, but conservatism is not consistent with vegan principles. I regularly work alongside non-vegan climate activists fighting the fossil fuel industry. As much as I want them to be vegan, and as much as I see their eating habits as inconsistent with their values, I'm willing to set aside our differences in the interest of solidarity. In the same way, I'm willing to set aside political differences with fellow vegans and participate in focused animal rights activism. Unless you are a straight up white supremacist, in which case you can fuck off. Overt racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. will not be tolerated because tolerance of intolerance is not tolerance. One day speciesism will be viewed in the same light, but we're at a point in history where strategically we can't exclude speciesists from environmental and social justice actions because we haven't reached critical mass. But just because I'm willing to accept people as human beings and set aside differences, that doesn't mean I'm accepting of their beliefs. I'm not going to shy away from publicly critiquing harmful ideas, and if you feel alienated by my content, that's on you, because it's not my intent. If you disagree with me, then you're welcome to create a channel and provide a rebuttal, and we can duke it out in the battle of ideas, bro. Alright, now that we've gotten a bajillion disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. To be logically consistent, if you care about animals, then your compassion must extend to other human beings, and vice versa. So anything that violates human rights or leads to the exploitation of humans is inconsistent with the principles that veganism rests on, because humans are in fact animals. We can hopefully agree that to be racist, sexist, or homophobic, but anti-speciesist is contradictory. The core of these isms, what makes them problematic, is discrimination based on arbitrary characteristics. Historically, it has been the Conservative Party that has fought to restrict rights for women and LGBT folks. If you identify as a conservative but you support gay marriage and equality for women, you have to recognize that there has been a mass cultural shift towards supporting these things. And it was progressive activists that steered the ship in this direction. Rewind the clock, and it was the conservative position to uphold traditional marriage and gender roles. Homophobia and sexism are now socially unacceptable, and it wasn't conservative values that got us here. Donald Trump's campaign slogan was, "Make America Great Again." If you think that we've devolved as a society and you wish to return to the good old days, you are failing to acknowledge all of the social progress that we've made and how far we've come. And if you're more of a neoliberal centrist fighting to maintain the status quo and not let those evil socialists take control, then you're failing to recognize how much further we still have to go.
Because I'll tell you, if you look at what we have now and the state of our world now, how are we doing? How are we doing?
Well, I think we might have a little disagreement here too, because we're doing pretty well.
Really?
Yeah.
You and I are doing well, Dave.
No, I mean the world, there's infant mortality rates are at the lowest they've ever been. There's less violence there's ever been. There's less, but there's less people starving now than there were 50 years ago.
Well, I agree with that, but it's 12,000. Hold on. I hear that.
Yeah.
12,000 a day.
Well, I'm not saying the world's perfect, but almost all of the metrics that we can judge a successful world on, everything's trending better.
If you think the world is pretty hunky-dory, you are incredibly privileged. And yes, a gay man like Dave Rubin has privilege. I said this in my video, Why Veganism is Political. Animal liberation is an extremely progressive ideal. If you consider yourself to be socially liberal but fiscally conservative, then you may be thinking, yes, duh, fighting for animal rights is a socially progressive position. But how is conservative economic policy antithetical to veganism? Well, let's dive into it. Fiscal conservatism is the belief that the invisible hand of the free market and the privatization of social services will create the most desirable outcomes for society. But since the Reagan era and the rise of neoliberalism, which is essentially free market capitalism with a few regulations in place, it is observable that this ideology has not created very desirable outcomes. In fact, tax cuts for the rich and deregulation of industry has led to the exploitation of people within the US and all around the globe, and the destruction of our planet, which has caused immense suffering. Rolling back environmental regulations and letting industries do as they please hurts animals because it destroys ecosystems, leading to species extinction, etc. Things like planned obsolescence, single-use plastic, and styrofoam should be banned. But conservatives, due to their belief that the free market is glorious and wonderful, believe that a government ban on such things would be ineffective. This is demonstrably false, given that we've necessarily banned many harmful chemicals, including lead in paint and mercury in thermometers. History has shown us again and again that conservative economic theory has been an abject failure, leading to a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, a shrinking middle class, and increased rates of depression and anxiety because people are overworked and underpaid. Compare the US to Scandinavian countries. In almost every category, the Scandinavian model of social democracy beats our neoliberal capitalist model. The people there are happier and healthier, yet conservatives argue that the answer to our problems is not to copy this model, but to move in the opposite direction. I want to briefly touch on income inequality. There are 607 billionaires in the US and many, many more multimillionaires. Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, has over $100 billion. Meanwhile, people are starving and dying because they don't have access to healthcare. Most people have a hard time conceptualizing how much money this is. And with this amount of money comes an enormous amount of power. If you think we live in a meritocracy rather than a plutocracy, you are utterly delusional. You are blinded by your privilege and you're not looking outside of your cushy little bubble. I may make an entire video on whether or not billionaires should exist, so stay tuned for that. Lastly, I understand that many conservatives are kind and charitable. They're not all evil, greedy assholes who don't care about other people. But they fail to realize that the policies they support have negative outcomes for people and the planet. In the same way that carnists care about animals, yet are blind to the reality that their choices contribute to needless suffering and violence. I hope this adequately conveyed why conservatism is antithetical to veganism. I feel like my videos are never thorough enough, but if I were to elaborate on every single point, then they'd be 40 minutes long and not as many people would watch them. And I certainly wouldn't be able to keep up with my current upload schedule. So let me know in the comments if you'd rather me be more thorough and post fewer videos, or keep up the short weekly videos. Alright, see ya.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan, man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now.